Welcome, everyone. Bruchim Habayim. Welcome to Temple Israel. If you come to services tomorrow night here, and I highly recommend that you do, I will be speaking about how we can transform our burdens into tools to make the world a better place. And the example that I'll be using is the example of David and Eileen Techner, who transformed the worst tragedy of their lives, the death of their daughter Alicia Joy 40 years ago, into a conference that I believe has not only made our community healthier, but has indeed saved lives. And I think that's going to be the case tonight as well. Their son, Chad, will also be addressing us this evening. But this conference, this discussion is very personal for me because of several of the presenters. And I just want to share this with you because Jamie Daniels, of blessed memory, was my son Jesse's best friend and was at our house all the time. He was the sweetest of souls. And you'll hear his story. Some of you who were here for Mincha Moments at Yom Kippur already heard the story from his mother, Lisa. You'll be hearing from his father, Ken. You may recognize him if you're a Red Wings fan as well, but he won't be talking Red Wings this evening. He'll be talking about Jamie. And probably one of the saddest moments of my career as a rabbi was I very rarely get to go on vacation with my son. He lives in Colorado, and we had arranged it. We were out of the country. We had literally just landed, and I get a phone call from Ken to tell me that Jamie had just died. And unfortunately, I was dealing with the bereaved father and watching the face of my son as he was hearing the news from me as I was talking on the telephone. And I just can't remember a sadder moment that I've ever experienced. He was a beautiful soul, and we're going to transform their burden tonight, hopefully, into a tool that you can use to make the world a better place. There's some other people that are speaking that have a real place in my heart. Judge Sosnick is my judge. What I mean by that is he presided over the only case that I've been part of. Thankfully, I was only a juror, and he said to me, Rabbi, when he said, Rabbi, I've heard some of your sermons. And I said, well, I've never heard any of your verdicts, so it will be very interesting to see what happens. And I will just say that he's known for his good works in the community, renowned indeed. But I do remember that just the humor and the gentleness with which he handled that case made me, and this is true, actually anxious to serve jury duty. And I think I may be the only person who can say that, but I really do look forward to it because of that introduction that I had from Judge Sosnick. Now, Chief Patton, on the other hand, I have never had any professional experience with. I've never been arrested by him. I've never heard any of his, but he will be here to talk about what's happening in West Bloomfield and how the police department is having to deal with this. Steve Feldman is one of my teachers. He'll be a teacher here today. He's my teacher in yoga. He's a teacher of life, and I think you'll be really interested to hear what he has to say as well. And then another one that just grabs my heart, where is he? Josh Roberts was my kid, my youth group kid. Our families were very close, and as this journey of his began, and I had a small part in it, unfortunately, and I just cannot tell you how proud I am that journey has ended here with him as such a role model for all of us. It really, I'm not his dad, but I feel that kind of nachas. But his dad is sitting right here, and I can see it on his face as well. So that really is our program. There'll be some time for questions and answers at the end and so forth, but I don't want to take any more of your time except to say that inspired by the Techners and by the speakers here today, our job, our duty is to take their burdens and to transform them into tools to make our world a better place. And with that, let's welcome our panelists.
Thank you, Rabbi. ESPN E60, great documentarians, will be doing a long piece on my son's life, which should be out, we're hoping, the next month or so. They're working on that. And the producer called a couple of days ago and said, do you have some pictures that he needed? And I said, sure, I'll scour through some boxes. And as I went through the boxes, I found this, and it's a coupon. And on it, it says, this coupon, it's from my son, Jamie. This coupon for your birthday is a 1-hour complimentary back massage given by your daughter, Arlen. Happy birthday, love, Jamie. That is my son's sense of humor. That's why we miss him so much. And as our children grow older, as you know, and they leave the nest for college, with their smartphones as their main companion, and texting becomes the primary source of communication, as it was for Jamie, whether it be for money or for help with his pick in his hockey fantasy leagues, of which he rarely took my advice, and for that he was a typical teenager. But when Jamie did actually use that phone to make a call, it rarely ended without this from him: love you, bye. And that wasn't just to me or to his sister or to his mom, but to his friends too. Love you, bye. Jamie was loving and loyal to a fault in the end. He was so caring, always on the lookout for his best friend, his sister Arlen. Well, she's at Michigan State and still is. And on the lookout for me when someone in Twitter's early days took to criticizing my performance. Jamie somehow, through his detective work, found him, sought him out in a restaurant in East Lansing, and let him know what he thought. He always had everyone's back, and we had his, but if only we knew how addiction doesn't discriminate. If only I knew then what I know now, the shame and the stigma that addiction creates. And to those families going through this, we must drop the notion of what we think an addict is. Those who battle cancer are said to have staged a valiant struggle. Those who die from addiction apparently die an ugly, lonely death. The family needs to put the feeling of shame aside. The stigma only makes the epidemic worse, and indeed it can preclude recovery. We need to band together as a community because this epidemic does not discriminate. It knows no socioeconomic boundaries. As my good friend and former colleague with Hockey Night in Canada, Scott Oak, says, whose son Bruce passed away 6 years ago from a heroin addiction, it's nature versus nurture. Two kids in the same home can be brought up the same way. One could be an addict. The chemical receptors in the brain work differently. It's nature. Jamie was about a whole lot more than his addiction. He wanted a better life, but addiction got a hold of him and it just wouldn't let go. We believe for Jamie, his addiction started with Adderall and perhaps faking a test to get it. Adderall, widely prescribed by psychiatrists to help kids focus on exams. Many need it, many don't. Addiction, by definition, is a chronic brain disorder. Some people have no craving for more medication. But Jamie's chemical makeup kept him wanting more, and that was nature taking over. While at Michigan State, Jamie was introduced to opioids. The freshman who started him on that path called me after Jamie's death in an attempt to clear his conscience. The overprescribing of narcotic medication has reached epidemic proportions, as anyone in this room will know, and it's happening worldwide. Only abstinence from anything, such as Vicodin, Oxycontin, Percocet, oxycodone, can avert any further craving. And yes, even Adderall, unless there is zero question of its need. Adderall is rampant for resale at colleges across the United States and in Canada. Prescription drugs last year took more lives in Florida, where Jamie lost his life, than cocaine and heroin combined. 4 out of 5 heroin users started on prescription painkillers. Heroin becomes the cheaper alternative to prescription meds, and even in pill form, heroin can often be laced with fentanyl or carfentanil. A speck the size of a grain of sand can kill you. It's used to capture wild animals. A recent study stated 90% of people who battle addiction start using substances by the age of 18, and often something as simple as going into your family medicine cabinet. The CDC now says potentially addictive meds should be limited to 72 hours. Our Red Wings team, Dr. Tony Colucci, who is the medical director at Henry Ford Macomb Emergency Room, calls for 24 to 48 hours. After that, non-narcotic painkillers only. 142 kids are dying daily from an overdose throughout the United States. That's daily across the U.S. Addiction overpowers free will. But Jamie at 21 was willing to get help. He knew he had a problem, but less than a 2-week stay here in Brighton couldn't cure 2 years. Another relapse put him back in hospital here in Michigan, and another painful detox process for 10 days. A local psychologist recommended an inpatient treatment center in South Florida, and 24 hours later, Jamie was heading there on a plane, terrified, unsure, but at least he was willing to give it a try. He'd spent a month at a wonderful inpatient center, and any parent of a child going through this will tell you the only nights you are at peace are those nights you know your child is in a safe treatment facility. After 30 days and with the facility's assistance, Jamie found a terrific sober living home. He would attend outpatient treatment meetings, he'd be routinely drug tested, and be expected to find a job, which he did as a law firm clerk to acclimate himself back into society. But after 7 months clean, if we only knew of the criminal side of the recovery process. With the help of Florida State Attorney and the FBI of Palm Beach County, we now know all about the billion-dollar industry that is the broken recovery industry, loaded with corruption and criminal activity, and it took my son's life. While laws are starting to change, back in 2016, anyone could turn a house into a sober home, rent it out. It's all part of the Affordable Care Act, which makes payment for addiction treatment virtually unlimited. And what criminals do, they exploit it. So many sober homes, as a way to profit, prey on individuals in recovery with insurance. Insurance is gold, and Jamie had that. And these so-called sober homes pay individuals to recruit patients at 12-step programs or at work. These patient brokers get hundreds of dollars per person that they befriend, enticing them into a home with the promise of cheap rent, all covered by insurance. That's where Jamie, who'd been doing so well, got baited and trapped. And with drugs readily available in these homes, the temptation eventually has the relapsed client entering detox again, while the owners of the sober living homes, the doctors, and the laboratories associated with them all benefit from the insurance. Jamie was geeked because rent was now $50 a month, not $245 a week that he was paying in his first safe, legit home. And through that home, Jamie was then directed to a new doctor, a self-described addiction specialist who had put him on a new medication for his anxiety while Jamie was still on Prozac. It wasn't until after Jamie's death that we discovered this new doctor put him on alprazolam, also known as Xanax, a highly addictive drug, and not one that would commonly be prescribed to someone addicted to prescription medication. Xanax can make you feel on top of the world and prone to blackouts, and Jamie in that instance was just set up to fail. Just 4 days after being prescribed this new medication, Jamie ingested heroin laced with fentanyl that he got from someone in the sober home where he was living. He'd been clean for 7 months, but that pill shocked his heart while in his sleep with his roommate in the bed beside him. His roommate fled to another state, but not before texting me trying to extort money in return for some of Jamie's belongings, including a Star of David that he had taken. Over 4 months, in the final 2 houses where Jamie lived, there were bills for more than $60,000 for urine and blood tests. In fact, 3 of the days, Jamie's signatures were forged for blood work never taken because that would have been impossible. Jamie was here with us over Thanksgiving of 2016. The FBI was thankful because it was actually, in their words, one of 1,000 cases they could actually prove as fraudulent. The final facility where Jamie lived was linked to Kenneth Chapman, who was charged with insurance fraud and money laundering and is now serving 27 years in prison. Jamie was loving, caring, compassionate, even to a kid who was patient brokering who failed to get him the help that maybe could have saved his life. We heard stories from friends following his death how Jamie's magnetic personality impacted their lives. And if you ever met him, you'd know they're right. And going forward, we will carry his story to impact others, and we will save many lives. My family, with the help of Feinberg Addiction Services, is starting the Jamie Daniels Foundation so that no life due to shame, uncertainty, or limited resources will go without help. The Jamie Daniels Foundation will take a straightforward approach to creating long-term recoveries. That's what's needed, through our partnerships with those leading the fight against drug addiction. The foundation will provide the education and the resources that are necessary to empower recovering addicts to live lives of purpose and contribution. The Jamie Daniels Foundation will also provide scholarships for those without the financial means to afford necessary treatments that support healing and sobriety. Our mission is to help end the suffering for many families. Talking about a sickness, a disease, whether it be mental illness or addiction, is therapeutic, both for the person suffering and for those affected by that person. To suffer in silence only worsens the epidemic. We have to talk. Everybody has to talk. We all have to join the conversation without question. That is caring, that's friendship, that's loyalty. That was Jamie. Thank you.
Hi there. We'd like to thank everyone for coming. I really appreciate everyone coming. I really appreciate my parents putting on this conference to honor my sister. Many years we have, much more fun and uplifting conferences than this, but unfortunately this is what's needed at this point in time. In our business, unfortunately, we see the worst side of addiction and the end of things in way too many lives. One per year is way too many. The fact is that as things have been getting worse over the last few years, I went back through the statistics of just our chapel, so just one of 3 Jewish funeral homes in this community. And we're a fairly large Jewish community, but it's a very small population in terms of the area, the city, the state, or anything like that. So as Ken said, 165 people a day are losing their lives. We see a very small fraction of that. But 2 statistics really stood out to me when I was looking through it. One was that last year we saw a 400% increase in the opioid deaths that we deal with. Over the past few decades, it had been fairly, consistent, and last year there was a 400% increase, which is mind-blowing. And the other thing that I noticed was that of the young people deaths, 60+% of them were opioid related. That over the last 10 years, over 60% of the people that we've had to bury under the age of 40 were based on opioid addiction and opioid-related deaths. And it's kind of mind-blowing to look through. And so those were the 2 most glaring statistics that I saw looking through our stats, and keeping in mind that we're just one of 3 in a small community, and this is a major thing that affects everyone. And even if it's not someone in your family, there's someone that you know that you can help.
First of all, I want to thank Ken for that very important talk, and Lisa, we really appreciate you being here as well. One of the things that I feel blessed to be part of is a Jewish funeral home for a lot of reasons, and one of the reasons that I hate my job is what we're talking about tonight. This is, the best part of my job is I wake up every morning and I have no idea what I'm going to do the rest of the day. And the worst part of my job is I wake up in the morning and I have no idea what I'm going to be doing. And the truth of the matter is that, as Chad says, the statistics are staggering. And I use the example of, imagine giving your 16-year-old keys to the car without driver's training. Imagine just saying, just use your GPS, you'll get to wherever you need to go. That's kind of what I'm seeing a little bit from the opioid crisis that I see, not just in our community, but all over the place. So many of the kids that we see dying so young are being given the keys to the car with no idea where they're going. And the scary part of it is that it's a situation where oftentimes they're obtaining drugs from people that they don't know. They have no idea what they're getting. And all they're looking for is just a temporary fix to whatever they're going through. And oftentimes that leads to a call to people like me. And I've lost a child. And as we sit here 40 years, people ask me, how did you get over it? The answer to the question is, I've not gotten over it. I don't anticipate getting over it. I think the best that any parent that goes through this experience, because it is the worst experience you could possibly imagine, is bearing a child. It's just not supposed to be that way. And I think the best you can hope for is maybe that you might get used to it. You may get used to the fact that you had to bury a child. But I can tell you that I assume it's the same with Eileen, my wonderful wife, sitting in the front row here. There's not a day that goes by that I don't think about Alicia. There's not a day that goes by that I don't wonder what her kids would look like. I mean, when you got gorgeous grandkids like this, you have to wonder those things. And it is just a mystery. And one day, I believe that I will be reunited. And hopefully, I'll have a conversation with God and just say, what the hell were you thinking? I mean, what the hell were you, what good did this do? And it's a tough situation, but you move on with your lives. The purpose of this conference, I've been asked that question as many people have seen some of the publicity. So why are you doing this? And the answer to the question is, we need to educate people. We need to educate parents. We need to educate kids. We had a great session with the Temple Israel kids here. And we just have to, as it was just stated, we have to start talking about this. We have to start talking about this with our kids. We have to talk about the fact that it's just like driving a car. You put on a seatbelt for a reason, to keep you safe. And as parents, that's our job, to try to keep our kids safe. And that's really what this conference is all about. And I am so grateful for everybody that is on this panel. And Chad, thank you very much for your statistics. And I just hope that we can walk out of this room all a richer community for the knowledge that we need to do something. We just can't not do something. And the fact that you're here gives me hope that something will be done. And I thank you for that.
Well, good evening, everyone. Just quick show of hands, who here lives in West Bloomfield? Okay. Hi, my name's Mike Patton. I'm your police chief. I want to thank Temple Israel and the Greater West Bloomfield Community Coalition for hosting this event tonight. We often go out and speak about these things, and people would sit back and think, oh, here's the police chief. He'll have the answer for this. And I'm here to tell you, I don't. I really do not have an answer for what we're talking about tonight. I'll talk a little bit about our experiences in West Bloomfield. And people think, oh, West Bloomfield, this doesn't happen here. It does. It's just a couple quick numbers. Since we started tracking this in, let's say, this spring, almost exactly 4 years ago this month, we've recorded 42 heroin-related overdoses here in West Bloomfield. 12 of them have been fatal. Now, to put that in some perspective of West Bloomfield, relatively, affluent, educated, suburban community, I don't have, in that 4-year period, I don't certainly have 12 homicides. I don't have 12 fatal car crashes. I'm not even sure if I've had 12 suicides. But I've had 12 people ranging from late teens, early 20s, up to age 50-some, die from heroin-related overdoses here in West Bloomfield. And there would have been others if we didn't save them through the use of Narcan, or our fire department, who are rock stars also in your community, and they didn't come and save them. When you look at the national statistics, you're looking at 60,000 deaths here the last year or so related to these deaths. Put that in some perspective. If it's not already eclipsed the total number of car fatalities or gun violent crimes in the United States, that's a lot of deaths in the United States. And so we're talking about these kind of things across the United States. So what are we trying to do? Well, we look at what we do with the police, and people sit there and say, well, it's a drug problem. What are the police doing about it? Well, I always tell people that we perform a very narrow niche in the society here. We investigate alleged crimes and criminal activity, and we introduce people into a criminal justice system, and so eventually see someone like Judge Sosnick at some point in their life and try and get them onto the right path with their criminality. This is not just a crime problem. If there's one thing I can say with some certainty, we are not going to arrest, prosecute, and incarcerate our way out of a substance abuse problem that we have in all of our communities in the United States. That's just not going to happen. There's always going to be a role for law enforcement. And we do our traditional roles. I have officers assigned to the DEA task force. I have an officer assigned to the Oakland County Narcotics Enforcement Team. We have a 3-city, Farmington Hills, Novi, and West Bloomfield combined task force surveillance group called SONIC, the South Oakland Narcotics Intelligence Consortium. They do a lot more things other than just narcotics. So we apply, and of course, all our other detectives and officers. So yes, we're very actively involved in investigating drug crimes and arresting drug dealers and doing things like that from a traditional police role. We do have one case going on right now that's still currently working its way through the court. You sit back and say, well, is there a way to track down the drug dealers that sell these drugs to our family members and loved ones, that poison them, eventually can kill them? Yes, there's a way to do it. It's very difficult to connect those dots. We do have one current prosecution right now in which we did track down the drug dealer from Detroit, and we arrested him, and he's currently being processed through the Oakland County court system. But that's very difficult. In fact, even when we arrested that person, he even told us, hey, I'm a heroin dealer. He didn't know what he had sold them wasn't heroin, was just pure fentanyl that immediately killed the person that took it. Once we told him that, he probably didn't want to talk to us anymore, but that's the kind of nature of things like that. So drugs aren't going away, but this is a national crisis. And I hate using the word crisis because it sounds so dramatic, but when you're talking just tens and tens of thousands of deaths affecting every community, there's not one zip code in the United States that this does not affect, even here in sleepy West Bloomfield. Now, I mentioned about Narcan. That's a drug, if you're not familiar with it, that helps, it blocks the receptors and those kind of things that can help people recover from these things. And how many have heard of that before and know what it is? Okay, so everyone does. All right, so occasionally you're going to see an article in the newspaper where someone says, oh, someone's life was saved from this. Now, even though I don't encourage you to do it, if you look at some of the comments in the newspapers after that, they're very hostile. They're like, what are you saving their lives for? They brought this upon themselves. Now, I'm sounding a little harsh here, but they're speaking from ignorance, and they're speaking from hate. We're in the life-saving business, us in the fire department. That we don't think that way, okay? You're going to hear, you've heard, how this cycle of addiction that people are in, and you're going to hear from someone after me here, and they're struggling for that, and there is hope. And make no mistake, we are rooting for you. Despite the things you've done wrong in your life. Angela's sitting here, has been involved in presentations before. They've done wrong things criminally. They've been sanctioned for those things. But we are still rooting for them because we're involved with life-saving activities. Not everyone. And make no mistake, he is in a fight for his life still. Not everyone is going to win that fight, as we know. How many here have had not just a close friend, but a family member struggling through this? All right. I have people that work in the West Bloomfield Police Station that their children are struggling with this, and truly, they are just waiting for the phone call that they've overdosed again, and maybe this time they didn't make it. It affects everybody in every community. And sometimes it's important to come to communities like Temple Israel and talk about it. Because we somehow think sometimes that people in the Jewish community, in the Chaldean community, and certain other communities, that this isn't us. This is not happening in our community. They're in sort of a state of denial. Everyone is affected. Everyone is impacted by this. And so let's not be ignorant about it and how we deal with it. And talking about it is very important. Aside from the cathartic aspect for the ones that have lost their greatest treasures in their life, and the people that are still struggling with it, we do talk about it. And we have to, there's blame to share. It's not just what law enforcement is doing. You can blame medical people and people who overprescribe medications and kids who steal drugs from people's homes. And there's a lot of things that we talk about that should be addressed and can be addressed to help fight this cycle of addiction that we face in this country. So I thank you all for being here tonight. I encourage you, if you have concerns, for those who live in West Bloomfield, to give us a call. If we can help you, we certainly will do what we can to always help you. We are here to be of service to you. That's our pledge, and that's what we do. So don't be shy about calling us. And people always sit back and think like, I don't want to bother the police. It's probably nothing. We'd rather always just come out for 99 false alarms than not be there the one time that you really do need us. And we know those of you that perhaps are struggling with what we're talking about here tonight in your personal lives or your family lives, you're at your wit's end, and you're looking for help. And again, sometimes we're not the best ones to help because we do hit this, our little narrow niche in the society about what we do. Real quick question I can ask some of you. So we respond to, drug overdoses sometimes, and, when it's an emergency medical crisis, we're there with the fire department, and our primary focus is a medical emergency. But how many, by a show of hands, think that if there was a way to still criminally charge this person afterwards, think that we should do that? Okay, no one in this crowd thinks that. And why? I mean, this is a debate that we have internally in the police department sometimes, because sometimes there's a way to criminally charge these people. And people think, well, that's kind of piling on, that's not really helping their problems. And yet some people, and maybe some people that you may even hear tonight, sometimes the best thing that ever happened to them was court. Because some judge, is going to dangle an anvil over their head and make them do something that they couldn't bring themselves to do, their families or friends couldn't bring themselves to do. And there's no guarantee of that, because people, obviously, as we understand more every day, that people who are struggling with addiction, they cannot always control or help themselves. But sometimes that anvil dangling over their heads may be enough, and people, if you heard Angela's story here, that she was lucky when she was incarcerated. Lucky? Would you say it was luck? That you were incarcerated at a time in a facility that offered drug treatment program that helped her start to break her addiction issues. Thank you very much.
Good evening, everybody. I'm retired Judge Edward Sosnick. And looking around the room, I think a lot of you know me better as Eddie. That's who I am. I served 28 years as a judge in Oakland County, and I presided over juvenile drug court for 10 years. And that was a family-focused juvenile drug court, so both the parents and the kids were all in the same program. And they made all the difference in the world, because it really is a family effort. And the way our program worked, having the parents, in the end, when it works the way it's supposed to work, the parent got to be a parent and the kid got to be a kid, and it was a beautiful thing to go to a graduation and see that. Truth is that over my years and years, and before that I was chief trial lawyer in the prosecutor's office, I've probably seen about everything there is to see, and from attending autopsies and going on raids and things of that nature. And I've never lost hope, because I know that if we educate ourselves and not only work alone, but work together, we can make a huge difference. Growing up, my mother often used to say, sometimes in Yiddish, Little children, little problems. Oh my God, she's channeling me. Bigger children, bigger problems. And during my 28 years as a judge, I really understood. As our kids grow older, their problems often escalate. We now know, for example, that young adults, ages 18 to 25, face problems unique to this age group. They are more underserved and at risk for depression, thoughts of suicide, serious mental illness, substance abuse, and addiction. So the disease of addiction is often associated with all kinds of other things that we need to be aware of, and we need to make sure that when it becomes clear what the problems are, that there are not only help for the drug abuse, but there has to be help for all kinds of the emotional and the mental things that go on. Now, this is what I found, and I work in my own foundation is aimed at not only the young adults, but also the parents, grandparents, and caregivers. Parents, grandparents, and caregivers often lack the knowledge and understanding of their young adults' choices, problems, and behaviors. I mean, there's a lot different between a little kid going to kindergarten for the first time than your 18-year-old who, you know, you're glad to have the extra bedroom and et cetera, like, you know, sometimes. But the thing is that they're going into a world that you no longer have any control over. And that can be a really scary situation. And a lot of times, people don't really know what's going on, how this happy, wonderful kid is now depressed, doesn't seem to want to go to class, and all the other signs and symptoms that show that there's something wrong. I know this firsthand. I personally have attended several funerals, and some of which were for my drug court kids. I have spoken with surviving parents in an effort not only to comfort them, but to better understand their experiences. Because I needed to be educated, and I needed to understand as much as I could because I never stood in their shoes. A common thread connects all of these survivors and all of us here tonight. If only I had known. A man called me one day, his name was Mark, and he asked me to have lunch with him. And his son, when I met him, had died from an overdose at age 22. And he wanted to work with me and the people that I work with, and was happy to have him do that, even though he also died untimely. And over again, he would say to me, if only I had known, if I had only known that when my son wasn't answering the phone, that I should have gone over there. If only I had known that the runny nose was a sign or a symptom of maybe something else is going on, and on and on and on. If only I had known. So I'm dedicating myself to the little things that I can do and the things that you can do when we join with others, to not only teach parents what they need to know, but also once they know, and Ken said it, now that I know, if there's anything I can do about it. Our next two speakers are right on the front lines of information that we all need to hear. They are connected in this way. Both share firsthand experience, and you'll hear that in compelling and heart-wrenching words. Both are going to describe their own struggles with addiction. Steve Feinberg is the Chief Operating Officer of Feinberg Consulting, has been in recovery for many years. And he knows what a child and growing into an adolescent and a young adult, et cetera, know. And he knows what his parents don't know. And then a more recent young man in recovery, about 19 months, Josh Roberts, has been giving back by sharing his story as well. An early mentor of mine told me that it doesn't take the whole world to change the whole world. And that's one wonderful thing to do because it motivates you. You know, even if nobody else wants to do something, then maybe you could do it. But when you have a multitude, all of us joining together, I do believe that we can change the whole world. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome here, everybody. So my name is actually Steve Feldman.
Oh, sorry. I thought you took over the company.
And I'm gonna first tell you a little bit about myself and then provide some information and perspective on parenting, on substance misuse, and on addiction. First, I'm going to tell you that I'm here because I have an unbelievable passion for sharing information, not necessarily as an expert, but as somebody that has a lot of experience, both my own, and I have been blessed to have the opportunity professionally to gain and have a tremendous amount of experience. The truth is that addiction can impact and affect anybody. There's no prejudice at all. And I'm going to tell you a short story about myself as I lead in, not to make it about me at all, but just to show an example. You know, I grew up in what people would call as a normal way, a normal home, whatever normal is. But it was comfortable. My parents loved me, had a loving family. But somehow, at an early age, I had some discomfort, and unconsciously, subconsciously, the way that I dealt with my discomfort was to mask it. Somewhere, somehow, I wanted to escape and avoid my feelings. And I did this as I can remember as far back as being a little kid. I did this with food. You know, sugar is a tremendous drug, and I remember using and abusing food as a way to avoid, you know, how I felt. I learned it as a survival response. It was a way to go outside of myself to try to fix something inside of myself. And I had no idea that that was happening. But from food at a young age as a teenager, it kind of escalated to drinking and smoking marijuana. And I did it like the rest of my friends. And it was normal, whatever normal was. But what I did learn is that some of that was good, and then more was better. And it led me to explore and abuse other drugs. At some point, I tried cocaine for the first time. And at that first point, something happened to my brain that said this was the best thing that ever happened to me. And over a period of years, a whole bunch of years, it increased. And it increased into a way that I knew that I was in trouble. In fact, I was either on drugs, on the way to go get drugs, or figuring out how I could have. And anything that was going on at all in my life took a second fiddle to feeding that addiction. I knew I was in trouble and I needed help, and I was left feeling paralyzed in fear, what has been named by a few of the people that spoke before me, in tremendous shame, feeling alone, isolated, and fearful. I had a story in my head that if I asked for help, if I reached out for help, that somehow I would be less than. I would be looked down at. I would be shunned. I wouldn't be this guy that I tried to be so hard to show up as. And the people that love me the most would not want me in their life. This is a story or a narrative that kept me sick and kept me from reaching out for help. And in fact, addiction itself wants the person using not to reach out. It actually wants to say, this is not a big deal. We can deal with this on our own. It'll get better tomorrow. We can do it ourselves. So as I fast forward the story to April 17th of 1992, I walked into rehab after a long downward spiral. My wife and parents told me that I either go to treatment or I would no longer be supported. what I thought was maybe the worst day of my life, to admit that I needed help and that I had no other options. And it was this moment that I chose treatment. So I walked into the first session, and that night that I walked in, it was alumni night. So there were two speakers. The first speaker was a woman who told her story, and I have no recollection of really what it was. It was probably, inspiring and interesting. But next, Luther was the speaker. And let me tell you a little bit about Luther. I'll just digress for a second. One of the things that was playing in my head is that my problems were unique. Nobody could possibly understand what was going on for me. That's why I didn't want to share it with anybody. And it was deep and it was dark. Luther walked into the room. Luther was a black guy from the city of Detroit. He was a heroin addict. He was homeless. Me and Luther had nothing in common, not one thing. I had a house and a nice car. I grew up very comfortable. I wasn't a heroin addict. I wasn't black. Me and him had not one thing in common. And within 30 seconds of Luther talking, I can tell you that my hands still get sweaty thinking of sitting there. Within 30 seconds of Luther talking, I knew that I was the same as him, that I felt a connection and a camaraderie. And I felt hope, a glimmer of hope. And I remember sitting there that night saying that if I ever got this enough to share it with another person, that I would, in hopes that maybe it could be life-altering or life-saving for one other person. And I just feel so blessed to be able to share a story because maybe one person might get something. So I'm here to try and impact that one person in some way. I mentioned before that I was blessed with the opportunity to learn and gain experience professionally. My company is Feinberg Consulting, and we work with families related to issues, concerns, and crisis around substance misuse and addiction. I've been trained as an interventionist, and basically what that means is we help people get help. I heard something once that really stuck, and that I've been put in a place that my mess can become my message. And in going through all that I went through, all that I put my family through, all that I put the people through that I loved, the only amazing saving grace is that it can be used for good. And the program was really opened in that way. I love having the opportunity to talk to parents and families, to provide information and perspective that is eye-opening and hopefully valuable. Any topic that touches something so frightening, emotional, and dangerous sometimes makes it difficult to learn. So what my request is for everybody, just for the next little bit of time, is to be open. To be open and in discovery. Like, listen, not because what I have to say is fact, because I can't say it is. I got a narrative, I got a story, I got an opinion. And what I hope happens is through what I'm about to share and some of the information that I talk about, is that it just has you think. That maybe it changes from, I know, I already know, to I didn't necessarily think about that or contemplate that. So if parents only knew is the thought provoker that gets us thinking, and I will use this in delivering this information. So when we're talking about parenting in this arena, there's three kind of distinct areas. The first area is prevention. So this is about, I have young kids, there's never been an issue, and what do I do as a parent to prevent them from going down this road? The second distinction is that area from concern to crisis. So that could be, you know, I'm thinking that there's some problem in my house with my kids or with somebody that I love. I'm not really necessarily positive. All the way through, there's a crisis. I know something's going on. There's a legal issue. My kid's appearance is changing. I've caught him using drugs. He's lying, cheating, or she. So from concern to crisis is a particular area. And then the third is in recovery. You know, how do we parent and keep a context for our families that allows recovery? In each, it's important to understand the common denominator in which is the biggest impact as parents is what we have by the example that we are. It was once said to me by a famous Indian philosopher related to giving the best parenting advice. He said, live an ideal life and don't lecture. It was pretty sobering, because some of the best stuff that I ever had to say from a hypocritical place came out of my mouth. Like, I could say some really good stuff, but if I wasn't living that example, it did not matter. It's also valuable to look at us as parents as context or environment. And what I mean by that, when we talk about being environment, if we took a cactus, for instance, the environment that has a cactus grow is dry and heat. So if we try to grow a cactus in the rainforest, it's not going to work, no matter how hard we want it to happen. And if we want to grow healthy children and healthy families, it comes out of a context of healthy communication. It comes out of a context of being a good example. It comes out of a context of being willing to sacrifice. And I'll stop here and pause. Contemplate that. What are you growing? Think about the highest goal that you have when it comes to raising your kids. And once you have that in mind, use this as a guide. Is my way of being, or what I'm doing with my kids, supportive of my highest goal for them? So this is the question that has us set the context for our families. Are we a healthy environment for our children? We hear things to justify and rationalize behavior by parents all the time. They won't know. They do know. It's only once in a while. It matters. It's only pot. It's legal in a lot of places. It's a gateway drug. It matters. I don't drink and drive. Kids see you drink or use, it matters. So really, in the first part of this is us being context for our children, being an example. What to know from concern to crisis? Wow, there's a lot of information here in this domain. Let's start out by talking about addiction. Addiction is a chronic disease. Addiction is not something that you go into the hospital for, go into treatment, and it gets fixed. It's not a going in and having a gallbladder removed and you heal from it and it's better. It's chronic. Addiction is a force that hijacks the individual and brainwashes the family into denial and paralysis and enabling. I can tell you firsthand that addiction slowly puts its arm around the neck of that person using and then cinches it up. And that brain is hijacked. There are decisions that I have made and so many people that we have worked with that would never be made if that addiction wasn't active. And at the same time, watching families get paralyzed in trying to help and love their families, not knowing what to do. Addiction wants to grow in the dark and in the shadow. It creates shame. Addiction is treatable. Recovery is possible. You know, many times addiction is masked by mental health diagnosis and then fed with prescription medication. And mental illness is a very, very real thing. But one of the first things that's necessary is to help somebody get clean and sober, to be able to measure a baseline, to really know what's going on. Addiction can be overcome with love. If only I knew that addiction is not a weakness or a moral failing. If only I knew that addiction is a family disease. Shame wants to keep that disease secret. The secret is the thing that allows addiction to grow. The secret is the thing that allows shame to grow. When shame grows, discomfort grows. And when discomfort grows, the person in addiction does not want to feel that discomfort. So they mask it with the very thing that creates the shame in the first place. This past week, we worked with a family that called us about doing an intervention, about getting a 32-year-old guy the help that he needed. But when we talk about denial being such a big part of this, or shame being such a big part of it, it was really a two-part intervention. The first part was we had to intervene on mom. The daughters called and said, listen, we want to help my brother, but my mom continues to enable him. She pays for his house, she pays for his car, pays for his insurance, gives him money all the time. And he's been on opiates for a bunch of years, but since my dad died in the last 2 years, he's been shooting heroin, and we saw pictures in his house with needles everywhere and crack pipes everywhere. So we need to help tell mom and get her on board. And we walked into the house and we sat down with the family, and first it was a surprise for mom. And we told her why we were there and asked her to listen to what everybody had to say, and it didn't take very long until she recognized that what was happening was her daughters and son-in-laws were so concerned and had so much love in their heart that she surrendered, and she became scared, and she said, hey, listen, I'll do this. And we spent the next couple of days preparing to set up where each person in the family wrote these very powerful impact letters that shared from a really loving place the concern they had, the memories of great times that they had with the person, the concerns, and an ask. And this past Monday, this young man came to his best friend's house thinking he was coming there to do some work when his family, his brother-in-law, and his best friend were there. And they were so afraid that he wasn't going to do this, that he had every objection in the world, that he was going to be mad, that he was going to be all these things. And one person after another read their letters, and it was emotional, and they were crying, and it was heart-wrenching. And he sat there, and a tear rolled down his face, and everybody finished, and he said, I'm going to go have a cigarette, I'm not going to run, and then tell me about the place I'm going. He got on a plane, and he's in detox, and on the way here I got a text that although he's really physically uncomfortable, he's really glad that he's in the place that he's in. Healing happens when it's witnessed by others. Healing happens when action is taken. Addiction continues with procrastination and worry. If I only knew that when I suspected an issue or know that there is one, that I can reach out for help. This help can come from experienced professionals in the field of addiction and recovery. And this is a shout out to what Ken was talking about. This is going to the person or people that are credible, that have the experience, that have the credentials, that have the strong reputation. You know, in this room, if somebody needed the best plumber, if somebody needed the guy who was able to do, like everybody in this room has got a guy for whatever it is. But somehow in this field, people don't want to talk about it, so they go to Google and they Google it. And there's a lot of money in addiction recovery and treatment centers, a tremendous amount of money, especially in the insurance game. Ken was talking all about it. So with that kind of money at stake, these people have the ability and the budgets to make websites look awful fantastic online. And because, I don't know if you know this, but everything that we see on the internet is not true. But when it comes to this, the amount of decisions that are made it's incredible. So to be able to talk about it, to be able to get help from an experienced, vetted professional, if only I knew that addiction or substance misuse is not going to get better on its own. Whether it's the person that's using that knows they have a problem, or whether it's a family member, that is the message of denial on the shoulder at all times. Somehow it's going to get better. If only this, if only that. And that is the disease that's talking. If I only knew that substance misuse, risky behavior, and addiction is a result of underlying pain and trauma and is used as a coping mechanism. As a coping mechanism that initially could be really effective and ultimately drastically ineffective. If only I knew what enabling behavior was and understood it. So as a parent and as a family member, this is a crucial area. This is the environment we're talking about. Enabling behavior might be trying to fix it for another person. Enabling behavior might be trying to support it with money, with rescue. Enabling behavior may be making excuses for another. Enabling behavior perpetuates addiction. So the word intervention conjures up all kinds of thoughts. You know, there's a program on, and sometimes it's really, really dramatic, and sometimes it's like a huge surprise. But we talk about this all the time. Intervention, another word for intervention really could be interruption. And it's interruption in a path that somebody is going that isn't working. And there's many, many different ways to show up with an interruption or an intervention. A new possibility. Recovery and healing comes from putting on a new lens. A lens that is that of hope and healing. Addiction also wants to say, there's no hope. It's hopeless. It's not going to get any better. There's no other way. And a big part of what any family member can do, what we do, is to try to put on a new lens, to have somebody see that there is a different way. If only I knew that it's not a quick fix. What feels like the poison in the beginning is the nectar in the end. And what is that poison? To confront this, to set powerful boundaries, to get help, to mean what you say, to be willing to be uncomfortable. If I only knew that these things create a sense of healing, recovery, and joy, and connection. And where does it come from? So connection in recovery comes from community, from connecting with others, from humility, from vulnerability. These are the exact opposite things that the shame response wants to say, don't talk about it. And don't talk about it is the thing that has lives being lost, that has lives being ruined, that has relationships being ruined. It is uncomfortable. We don't necessarily have the tools. But the truth is that without being uncomfortable, without creating a different path, nothing is going to change. We are meant to be connected with other people. Recovery is about connection. Addiction is about isolation. There are some amazing, amazing groups. The 12-step programs that are out there for active addicts, for families, for really just about anything. 12 steps provide a way of living that has probably helped more people in this last century than any other self-help thing at all. And you go and you may put in $1, and if you don't have one, you don't need to. And there's other community-based groups that help people connect. Connection can be created and nurtured for everyone. Action is the answer in the prevention stage. Reaching out and getting help in the concern to crisis phase. Continued self-care, awareness, and connection in the recovery phase. I'll leave you with this. Be willing to talk about it. Realize that shame and denial are part of the sickness, and each one of us are examples for those around us, especially our kids. Thank you very much for letting me share.
I'm Josh Roberts. I'm a recovering opiate addict. I'm a little bit nervous to do this, so just kind of bear with me if you see me sweating, or it's just me going through my nervous tics or whatever. But sharing on this topic is much more important. In recovery, we're taught to get out of our comfort zone and carry the message, and that's much more important than me being a little nervous or uncomfortable. So. I'm going to tell you a little bit about my story, about how I progressed into opiate addiction, and that I'm now in recovery, and that there is hope out there, and there is a way out. And so I'm just going to briefly share that. So I grew up here in West Bloomfield. I was a member here at Temple Israel. I had a really great childhood. I had great parents, a great family. I played sports. But I always felt like a loner. Even though I had friends, I never really felt comfortable in my own skin. When I got into high school, I became friends with some people who were smoking weed and drinking, and all of a sudden I had friends and I was cool and I felt comfortable, and I was able to do a lot of things that I wasn't able to do before. But then it got to the point where using alcohol and weed and was my way of dealing with life. If I had a bad day, I got high. If I had a good day, I got high. If I lost a loved one, I got high. I got to a point where I didn't feel comfortable unless I had some sort of substance in my body. When I got up in the morning, I felt weird, and I had to do something to numb that feeling, and also to deal with emotional things. And for years and years, I pushed emotions down so I didn't have to deal with them. I was still able to do well in high school, and I graduated high school and college, and I got into law school. At this point, I was just smoking weed and drinking, and although I was doing it pretty regularly, I was still able to get a lot of a lot of stuff done and be fairly successful. I was introduced to opiate painkillers shortly before I graduated college at Oakland University. Steve said that marijuana is a gateway drug, and for me it absolutely was. Because I had used marijuana before, using opiate painkillers, pills, wasn't that big of a deal for me because I had already, been using drugs. And the other thing that I looked at was that it came in a pill form, was regulated by the government, so it wasn't something that I looked at as unsafe. I didn't know a lot about addiction. I didn't know about overdose. I just knew the way it made me feel. It made me feel invincible. I could talk to anyone. I could do anything. It gave me confidence. It gave me energy. It gave me, euphoria. So shortly after that, right before I graduated college, my mom was diagnosed with ovarian cancer. I began to use pills more and more, and I used it to deal with the stress of daily life. I started law school that fall, and with my mom being sick and more stress from law school, I started, it became harder and harder to go a day without using opiates. I began to compromise the morals and values that I was raised with. So my addiction started to progress, and I began using on a regular and eventually daily basis. And I guess one of the things that I wanted to share with you is what it looks like when someone is in active addiction. So maybe if you know someone who's dealing with that, you can maybe see some warning signs. And I'll just tell you what I know that I look like, what physical symptoms and in the way that I was acting. So physically, when you're high on opiates, you have your pupils look like pinpoints. I was constantly nodding out, sitting in front of the couch or sitting at dinner. Really at any point if I'd sat down, and I would go like just, nodding out until your head pops up like that. And I was asked about, oh, what's wrong with you? Are you high? Are you, what's going on with you? And I would always make up an excuse. I would say, I'm tired. I didn't sleep well. I've been working really hard in school, and it was always an excuse. And lying became like a way of life for me. I lied about everything and anything, and that's not the person that I am when I'm in recovery. But as my disease took over, all my energy went towards getting high. All my money went towards getting high. I asked my parents if I could borrow money. I would make up wild stories about why I needed money and why I didn't have any money. I was undependable. I was always late, or I didn't show up at all, and I always made up stories about why I didn't show up. I manipulated those closest to me, mainly my parents. I used their naivete and their belief that there was no way that their son was an addict to manipulate them to get what I wanted. The only thing that mattered was getting high, and I would do anything to achieve that goal. But I will also say that I've spoken with my parents, and I'll tell you, an addict, I never did those things because I wanted to hurt the people that were closest to me. I did them because I had disease. My disease was, my disease was out of control. When I'm in recovery, I've been, clean and sober 13 months now, and when I'm living a life of recovery, I would never do the type of things that I did when I was in active addiction. So I was told that, we're not bad people trying to get better, we're sick people trying to get healthy. And so I just want to stress that I never did any of that stuff because I wanted to hurt the people that were closest to me. I did it because I had to do it, and my disease was out of control. And when I ran out of money and I ran out of opiates, I went into opiate withdrawal. And what that looks like is very similar to flu-like symptoms. I have a runny nose, sniffling a lot. You'd be very tired, but also not be able to sleep, insomnia, diarrhea, nausea, vomiting. Your eyes would be dilated when you weren't on opiates as opposed to pinpoints. They'd be watery. You'd be yawning a lot. Had muscle aches. So I went to a few rehabs over a number of years, since my addiction started, my opiate addiction started. I never could really stay clean for very long. I would always relapse. And my mom died last January, and you know, from her cancer, and I spun out of control. For the next month until the beginning of February, I was using like I'd never used before. My disease was really bad. It was probably the worst it had ever been. I got in some legal trouble. I spent a night in the West Bloomfield jail for, I got a DUI, and I realized I needed help, and that was the beginning of February last year. And I went to Brighton Hospital, and then after that, I got a scholarship to a long-term treatment center in Los Angeles called Beit Teshuva. It's a Jewish treatment center that, you know, integrates Judaism and recovery, and it was the best place that I could ever have been. It changed my life. So as I said, you know, recovery is possible. There's a way out. You know, the way I do it is through AA. Even though alcohol wasn't my drug of choice, or you know, I find that that's where I fit in. You know, working the 12 steps, finding spirituality, working with other people, you know, being able to share the message and carry the message, and you know, living in recovery. You know, and I'm very passionate about helping other people. I want to share this message so others don't have to suffer like I did, or overdose and die like many are. I've been given a second chance, and I feel blessed. I have so much in my life to be grateful for, and many of the things I lost due to my recovery have begun to come back. The only way for things to stay that way is to live a life of recovery, and it's not just a, you know, short-term fix. It's a continual thing. It's every day. It's for the rest of my life. And sometimes it's hard to think of, but, you know, we're taught in recovery to live life one day at a time, and that's what I'm doing. Yeah.
Thank you so much to all of our speakers tonight for sharing your incredibly personal stories and your important messages. We really appreciate you all being here. We have some time for some questions. So Rabbi Marla and I will be on either side. If you have questions, raise your hand. We'll bring a microphone over to you.
My name is Dr. Gupta, and I'm one of the practitioners in the area. The first speaker made a comment regarding the insurance companies and the, you know, how it has happened. 4 or 5 years ago, they came up with standards of care, which included that how good you could manage the pain for a patient, post-op patients. And that created a problem. Everybody started getting Vicodins and Vicodins and Vicodins. And that has resulted in major crisis in the last 4 or 5 years. Next thing, this is the first time the state of Michigan has started to address this issue. Every doctor in the state of Michigan who is going to be relicensed had to go through a 3 hours of opioid training, which means they have to know what to prescribe, what not to prescribe. Thank you.
Now there's lots of questions.
Okay, Mike.
Hi, I'm Dr. Ira Michelson, but everyone calls me Mike. I am U of M trained. I am board certified in OBGYN, and I am board certified in addiction medicine. I have a private practice in Maple and Coolidge where I take care of addiction. I specialize in pregnant heroin addicts or addicts, and I see men and women for addiction, and I take all insurances, including Medicaid. That's 3.5 days a week. The other 2.5 days a week, I work at Brighton Hospital. I just came from there a few minutes ago where we deal with a lot of polysubstance abuse and people who cannot be treated outpatient who are quite ill. My biggest concern is we're working our tails off to help people when their brains have already changed, and to get them to sobriety, not for a week, a month, or a year, but for a lifetime, is such a struggle. It is, as you say, a chronic, lifelong, horrible illness with exacerbations and relapses that often end in death, and I've seen too many funerals. I wish there was a way. I know we have studies where we can look at children and predict who needs the extra help and approach them at that point, so when you have a child who feels out of sorts at second grade or third grade, there ought to be a way we can pour on a ton of extra time and energy before their brain is completely changed. The only other thing is I want to let you know what a board-certified addiction medicine specialist is. Physicians do a 3-hour course. Thank you, Dr. Gupta. If you want to write Suboxone and just be a Suboxone doc, you take an 8-hour weekend course. But if you want to be board certified, and there are only 3,000 of us nationally, you have to have 2,500 hours of working with addicts. You take dozens of courses, and you take the national boards in addiction medicine, so you truly know all the different drugs and their effects. If there's any way I can be of help with anyone, let me know.
Thank you.
My name is Deirdre Newman, and I have epilepsy, and I've had it for almost 3/4 of my life, and I have been depressed almost my whole life, and I've tried to kill myself a couple of times, and I've overdosed on my medication, and I've been locked in one of those places that was mentioned here, and those places are terrible. And I was told if I ever mentioned I wanted to die again, that I would be put back in one of those places. And those places are terrible to live inside of. And I lost my mother of cancer, and my mother took wonderful care of me. And my mother had 3 businesses come from my epilepsy. And my father here is a pharmacist. And because he's a pharmacist, I've had 3 medications created on me. But I was so depressed from living in one of those places that I wanted to kill myself again because of being in one of those organizations where you have to live in if you are depressed. And living in those places are terrible. And I wanted you to know that you have to help a person to make them happy instead of putting them in one of those places, because those places make you more unhappy than if you are living by yourself and someone is trying to make you happy. Because I would cry my head off and I wanted to kill myself again. And I was told if I ever wanted to kill myself again, I would be put back in one of those places. And I live with my father in Waterford, and that is the most boring city you can ever live in. Because I have epilepsy and I am not able to drive, and the bus does not run in Waterford. I cannot do one single thing, and I am bored to death, and I am a member of the Friendship Circle, and I weave there. And I hate living in Waterford. And I want you to know that when you are put in one of those organizations, you get more unhappy. So when you get very depressed when you are in one of those places, you have to be very careful of when you put someone in there.
Thank you so much.
My name is Laura Solomon, and I want to start by saying that I am a West Bloomfield resident. I am a mother of a gratefully recovering addict for the last 3 years, and Patton there saved his life. Sorry. And my son, Sam, was a lifelong friend of Jamie Daniels. May he rest in peace. I'm also a detox counselor at Advanced Rapid Detox. We're in Pontiac General Hospital, and we see people who are rich and poor. We see people who come from fabulous homes and horrible homes. There is no line as to what we see, but I think the most important thing is that I applaud everyone's honesty and transparency and sharing their story and knowing there is hope. There's obviously a lot of people here who can help. I'm here with Dr. Aronoff, who is the anesthesiologist at the practice we work for. We promote detox under sedation, but we also believe in Vivitrol, which keeps you from having those cravings and long-term focus after that. So I wish you all wonderful things, and thank you for sharing your stories, and thank you for saving lives.
Hi, my name is Bob Hack. I'm a psychotherapist. Many years ago, I ran a program through Lake Orion called Partners in Prevention. It's a very well-funded, good program. I hope we can get it again. It was a lock-in program for 28 days, or 28 hours, I'm sorry, with high school students, and we had a really good relationship. I hope we can have this program re-entered again. I think it's a federally funded program.
Thanks.
And you said about Narcan. Sorry, I learned this 20 years ago in college. What happened to it? All of a sudden, we're saying it's great.
Working with Judge Sosnick to get a program like that started again, to go into schools and synagogues and churches and camps to have recovering addicts speak to them. So definitely going to get that going.
I'm wondering if anybody has any specific questions for our panelists. Yeah. Okay, after.
Hi, I'm Tara Grecken. It's actually following up on that. I'm amazed that there isn't more being done in the schools, and I find the teenagers today, I mean, I grew up with the Say No to Drugs, the whole campaign. You had posters up everywhere. People were talking about it. Many of my friends, their parents were recovering alcoholics, and these kids were in, I guess, is it Al-Anon or Alateen? And, you know, the families were involved. This is so quiet today. I mean, we're just now starting to hear more and more about it. But like the psychiatrist said, like, why aren't we starting younger and talking more as a community? I just find that the teenagers, too, are a little flippant about drugs.
Yeah, let me respond to this very briefly for you. Look, all kids sometimes when we make presentations, look, they always feel like they're immortal and nothing's going to happen bad to them, and we as adults know differently. Lisa Berkey in the back there, she's the executive director of the Greater West Bloomfield Community Coalition. And I would invite you to meet and say hi to her, because these groups like hers and others are in the schools. They are making presentations. They're making presentations about cigarettes, about vaping, about marijuana, about these kind of substance abuse. So they have a program called Kids in Charge. They're talking, and it's actually unique to this area, West Bloomfield, the school districts here. It's very involved. They do that. There are drug surveys to the extent that you can survey the kids, and hopefully that you get honest, positive responses. We're thankful that our drug usage is reduced as compared to some other communities that are adjacent to us. I am very happy tonight to say I'm the police chief in West Bloomfield, not Waterford, but thank you very much. So very happy to be here in West Bloomfield, especially tonight. But we are, the coalition, so stop by and say hi to Lisa in the back. And if you belong to a synagogue, a church, a facility, your workplace, your school, and you want to get her and her other presenters, much like we had here tonight, and they can tailor-make a presentation to what your concern is, and they'll be more than happy to help you arrange that.
We have 19 coalitions in Oakland County. They all report up to the Alliance of Coalitions for Healthy Communities. So there's something like what I do all over Oakland County. And like Chief said, we have programming in the elementary school. We start as early as first grade educating kids. We do middle school and we do high school. So we have lots and lots of programming going on in our West Bloomfield schools. And also to reiterate what Chief said, when we survey our students in West Bloomfield, our numbers of our kids using drugs or alcohol or other substances were much lower in West Bloomfield than other communities due to the education we're providing in the schools.
Do they have that in Waterford?
There is a coalition in Waterford.
Okay. Lisa, if you don't mind me chiming in real quick too. Hi, I'm Angela. I partner with Lisa. I'm with the Alliance of Coalitions for Healthy Communities. I'm one of the speakers at the high schools and middle schools with the Keep Them Safe, Keep Them Healthy program. So I just wanted to say we usually have, so we come in, we talk to the middle school and the high school students. And then we also have a parent component to the talks, and we usually send a flyer home. So I'm just encouraging people to come out when we send those flyers home to the parent component, because when we come out to educate the parents, we are talking about all sorts of different parent tools, giving them tools. We talk a lot about opiates. We talk a lot about what the new vaping tools that the kids are using, what those look like, signs and symptoms, what you can look for, and how you can communicate with your kids more effectively. So you're getting a lot out of those parent presentations that we're doing that you can take home and use with your kids as early as that night that we do that presentation. So when you see that flyer come home, please come and encourage other people to come to that presentation, because a lot of people think, oh, you know, another drug talk. But please encourage people to come, because there's so much stigma that surrounds this. People think, oh, if I go, people will judge me. But we've talked tonight, this happens in every household. It does not discriminate socioeconomic status, no matter what. Please encourage other people to come out and tell them how important this is, because I'm hearing when I go out to talk to these kids that a lot of these kids, even as early as 5th grade, are starting with vaping. And this is a gateway to trying other things. So please, please, I encourage you to come out.
Hi, I'm Maria, and first of all, Temple Israel is doing an amazing job. I have an 8th grader and a 10th grader, and I've learned about opioids from them. And Josh, you really touched me. Thank you so much for sharing your story. Again, as a parent of an 8th grader and a 10th grader, I guess my concern is I'm wondering, parents, friends that I have that are my age and have kids that are my age, we're starting to see our kids want to experiment, and we're starting to see our kids that are, I mean, maybe going through the same things that you went through. And it's so hard to know where the limits are, what would you tell kids that are that age, teenagers, that are wanting to experiment?
It's a tough question. I mean, I don't, I know for myself that, that was what made me feel like I belonged, So it felt out of sorts because I didn't have like a whole big friend group, and when I did start experimenting, I started part of the cool crowd. But I don't know. I would just say, talk to your kids. I mean, I always had a very good relationship with my parents, and I was able to tell them pretty much everything. They knew what was going on with me, even though things got to the point that they did. So I can really talk to them and be honest with them that you're concerned.
Can we take one more question?
I'd like to add maybe one quick thing to that. Something we find very useful when we talk about that also is that know your children's friends and know their parents. And sometimes you have to make an assessment of your own children's friends and think, are they part of the problem or are they part of the solution?
Hi, I'm Jeff Foreman. I want to thank all the speakers. I mean, I really thought tonight was a wonderful session, and I learned a lot, even though I came thinking I knew a lot. I actually have a question, but I'm going to just preface it by my impression. My impression of how to get kids not to want to experiment is that it's very challenging and maybe impossible. It's sort of like recommending to kids that they use abstinence for birth control, as, you know, that kids are gonna have sex and we gotta teach them how to be responsible, and kids are gonna experiment with drugs. And the problem is only 1 in 10 of the kids who experiment are likely to become addicted, and you don't know who that one person is. And so my question for the panel, and maybe for some of the experts, I mean, we know that there's a strong genetic component. We know that if you have a relative who's an addict, the chances that your siblings or children will be addicts is much, much higher. So do you advise your relatives of this fact in terms of their really practicing abstinence from drugs? And is there any optimism that we might actually be able to have a genetic test that would be able to predict who is more likely to be an addict, which would really be extremely helpful?
So thank you for that. I can't speak to the genetic test, but what I can speak to is that as parents, we have influence in how we approach our kids. So because it's an uncomfortable topic and many times it's avoided, it's not talked about, it's quiet. And to be able to talk about it is really, really important, and talk about it in terms with some very powerful facts. Because whether somebody is going to become addicted or not is a game of Russian roulette for sure. But what we do know is there's tremendous studies that are available that the brain of a person who's under 25 is not fully developed, and the damage that is caused from use is documented. And it's documented in a way that affects what they're, how they're going to be able to grow and develop. So we can't say for sure that they're not going to experiment, but we can influence it by how we show up. And how we show up is with facts, how we show up is with caring, how we show up is being willing to have these conversations even when we might be dismissed by our kids. Because the power of wanting to experiment and go do this is wanting to be secret, wanting to be quiet, and wanting to be not heard. And our job is to speak up.
Thank you so much. I know that there are people who still have questions and experiences they want to share. There will be people outside with tables. You can go talk to them, share with each other, keep continuing this conversation that we started tonight. I really just want to say thank you to a whole lot of people for making tonight happen so meaningfully, so beautifully. And first of all, I just want to thank you. Thank you for coming. Thank you for taking your evening and opening your minds and being willing to go home and talk to your children. So thank you very much for that. I want to thank our panelists. I want to thank Josh, and I want to thank Steve and Ken for sharing your stories, for opening yourselves up to us, and making yourselves vulnerable so that we can learn from you. And you truly have been our teachers tonight, and I hope you will continue to keep telling your stories to people who really need to hear them, which is all of us. Thank you, Chief Patton, for being here, and we're glad you're our police chief and not the chief of Waterford. We thank Judge Sosnick, who I think was around the corner. Thank him for everything that he does and for being here tonight. The Restore Foundation and Angela, Thank you. And the Alliance of Coalitions for Healthy Communities, to Lisa Berkey, who's in the back and spoke, and the Greater West Bloomfield Community Coalition, to the Techner family. Thank you. Where are you? Thank you, Eileen. Thank you, Chad, David. We would not be here tonight if it were not for you. And so thank you so very much for making tonight happen, for last week when we met with our teenagers and they got to hear your stories, and knowing that we're stronger because we've had an experience like this tonight. So Carrie Provisor, who's the director of our Family Life Center, and Kate Bowman, who's also here, have just done a yeoman's job of putting together this conference this evening. And when you leave here, you'll each receive something called a doTERRA bag, and it is used to dispose of unused medications in an eco-friendly and safe way. And so how you do it, the directions are on the bag, so follow the directions. They are quite small, so if you have more medications than fit into the bag, you can drop them off at the West Bloomfield Police Department, which has Operation Medicine Cabinet, where you can drop off expired or unused medications anytime. You don't have to wait for that special day to drop off every the fall and the spring. There's a lot of sponsors who have tables outside. They have all kinds of materials. Please go to them. And I just want to end on a Jewish note. We are coming to the end of the book of Exodus. And when we come to the end of a book of the Bible, we say the phrase, Chazak, Chazak, v'nit chazek, which means be strong, and we will be strengthened by each other. And I think it's good advice for us tonight as we go forth into this unknown future, trying to keep our kids as safe and as strong as possible. So thank you all so much for coming tonight. And